2026. It is 11 a.m. and this is a meeting of the Bolton Select Board. The only item on our agenda today is a discussion about the candidates for police chief. So we will be discussing that and then taking a vote. So we had the opportunity to interview our three finalists on Friday. And it was the pleasure of the board to take the weekend to think about it, to review their submissions. So at this point, what I'd like to do is open up a discussion amongst the board members. I'd like to discuss each candidate in turn, some pros and cons, so that each one receives due consideration. And after we go through that exercise, I think it would make sense to see whether there are any candidates that we feel like we can exclude from further consideration, or whether we just want to keep discussing all three. I am happy to go first if you would like me to, or we can start with somebody else if anybody else would like to offer any of their thoughts on our first interviewee, who was Sergeant Bradley from Bolton. Bill, Brian, what is your pleasure in terms of order for discussion?
I can go if that's all right.
Sure.
So the pros for Mr. Bradley, obviously familiar with Bolton. I like the fact that he was a SRO, which is a very important position. Also had experience as a dispatcher as well, which also a important position. The technology discussion, I thought it was interesting when he brought up the Blue Voice AI, and it was he was the only candidate who I felt touched on technology that wasn't, for the best way to describe it, a tactical technology. The others discussed drones and body cameras, and I thought that was interesting discussion because that seems like more of an operational and efficiency technology. Okay. Those are the pros that I have. Do you want me to go into the cons, or are we?
Why don't we discuss all the pros first and see if we're all on the same page? Jenny, are you able to mute whoever has their microphone on that has the background noise?
Honestly, it was probably me. Yes, I can.
Thank you. Okay. Brian, do you want to go ahead and discuss your pros for Sergeant Bradley?
Sure. So I agree with what Bill said, particularly around the technology discussion. I really appreciated Mr. Bradley's answer to the question around sort of what would you do in your first 90 days around morale and cohesion. I thought his answer was the clearest in terms of, like, in my first 30 days, I'd meet one-on-one with everybody, formulate a plan, and the next 30 days sort of roll that plan out with the department and leadership. And then in the last 30 days, kind of reevaluate. So I thought that was a really good answer. I also thought his answers around the importance of feedback and measuring the effectiveness of different things. If they tried a new community outreach program, maybe doing a survey or getting some specific feedback around whether it was working or not. And I think in general, I thought he demonstrated really strong leadership qualities throughout the interview. I liked the collaborative style, the ability to, like, take in all the feedback, let the stuff that's not productive roll off your back, but really try to act on the feedback that is important. And I thought he had really strong communication skills as well, in my view. So I was really impressed, and I think that um, he's he's got a lot of leadership potential.
Great. Thank you. And I echo what both of you said. A couple of other things that I thought were real pros for him. Um, and this actually speaks to all the candidates, but I think bringing experience from outside of Bolton is helpful. Not that there's anything wrong with experience in Bolton, but I think getting more voices heard from things that they've seen in other departments, I think that's a valuable addition to what we already have. I think given his work history in Bolton, and his knowledge of the department, the staff, and the town, it would give him a very quick ramp up. I don't think he'd have a whole lot of a learning curve. I really appreciated, and again, this goes for all three candidates, but I really appreciated that he had a very long working history and commitment to his prior community. None of the candidates that we saw have been hopping from one place to another. All of them have shown real dedication to their communities. The other thing that I would say is I thought that he had an incredible amount of personability and confidence, which I thought spoke well. And finally, I noted that he did have a master's degree, which is something that we had indicated was desirable when we posted the position. So those are my pros. Does anybody else have anything else they want to throw in there before we move on? Okay. Well, Bill, do you want to start us out with some of the cons that you saw?
Yeah, and it's a double-edged sword. He's obviously familiar with Bolton, but he's also a peer of the current staff, and sometimes making that transition from peer to chief or boss can be difficult. Um, one of one of the cons I listed is that a slight con is he from the reading of his resume, he didn't have any private industry experience. Had always been within the police force, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to consider. And the something that I wasn't familiar with, and I've done some research since the meetings, is the accreditation process, which is a very, excuse me, very detailed and difficult process. He hasn't gone through that, where the other two candidates have gone in various degrees through the accreditation process, which I think is important to consider.
Thank you. Brian?
Um, well, Bill captured a lot of the things that I was going to say. I think the only thing that I would add is that I think it's difficult for anybody to make a transition into a leadership role, whether they're an internal candidate or an outside candidate. But I agree that there can be special challenges, especially if there's a change that a new chief would like to make. Sometimes it can be harder to initiate change um, if you've been there for a little while, but not impossible, right? So I don't want to say that that's an insurmountable. It's just something that comes to my mind. It's also a pretty significant jump in seniority, and I think that just in comparison to the other two candidates, they have a bit more concrete law enforcement experience under their belt. Again, not an insurmountable con, but certainly on that side of the ledger.
Thank you. A couple of things that I had noted is that out of all of the candidates, I did think that Sergeant Bradley had the thinnest experience of of being a supervisor and being at the top levels of a department, having only been a sergeant for the last couple of years in Bolton. All of his prior experience prior to that was patrol officer, SRO, and detective. Also, the vast majority of his experience is coming from a larger city as opposed to a small town, small community. And also, I thought that he was a little thin on his budgeting experience, which for me is a pretty important skill to have right off the bat, knowing the financial issues that, that we always need to address in Bolton with budgeting. So those were my cons. Does anybody want to say anything else on Sergeant Bradley before we move on? Okay, our next candidate was Sergeant Hoare from Mendon. So I guess to be fair, let's shift it up and put Brian in the hot seat first. You want to go through your pros?
Sure. Yeah, I thought that he seemed like somebody who had a decent amount of administrative experience. I thought um, some of the examples he gave around I think it was in response to the question of like, how have you gotten people to sort of get on board with the decision that they may not have initially loved? I thought he gave a good response there, which I think shows some strong change management qualities. And he also, I mean, Kate, you mentioned that this was true of, I think, all three of the candidates, but the longevity within the community that he had been serving, I think um, that's something that we would hope for officers here in Bolton, that people, like the community and want to stay here and continue to serve. So I thought that those were all pros. Uh, and he had also done, it was clear to me that he had done some homework around Bolton, like had watched some of our prior town meetings. And I thought that showed a level of prep that I would expect from a chief candidate.
Okay, great. And Bill, do you want to go next or do you want me to go? Happy to do
Sure.
either.
I will go. I will echo Brian. I was impressed that he had obviously watched the town meeting and looked like he had watched possibly some select board meetings, which aren't the most exciting things in the world. He comes from a town very similar to Bolton, population wise. There were three areas his direct experience that interest me. He mentioned that he had taken over the management of the evidence room, which speaks to, I'm sure, being very thorough and very detailed and following a lot of various different competing interests and regulations. It looked like, for lack of a better term, he's been involved in event planning with the community as well, which is good. And he has vast knowledge in crash reconstruction and has been involved in that. I was impressed that his chief was the one who pointed out the position to him, and there was a really nice and thorough recommendation from his current chief.
Thank you. Yeah, I also, I had a lot of the same things that you guys did. But with regard to the crash reconstruction role that he's played, one of the things that I thought was of huge value would be the number of contacts that he's made with other local police, state police, and other agencies in the course of doing that work. And I think having those contacts is going to be very beneficial in the central Massachusetts area for a chief. I liked that he had his master's degree. I liked that he worked on the accreditation for his department in 2024, so he's familiar with that process. And also in terms of the comparable community, I liked that it was not just the same size and sort of generally the same demographic as Bolton, but also that it has the same sort of traffic issues that Bolton has, in that it's got a couple of main roads and a 495. So I thought that given that traffic is one of, if not the biggest issue in Bolton, having that experience was very good. And moving on to the cons. Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So the first one, and I want to just first say, like, I know interviews can be nerve-wracking situations, so there was certainly, I'm sure, an element of that. But I thought that his communication skills in the interview were not as strong in my view. Like, obviously his initial statement went a little bit long, and I just think that being a strong, effective communicator is really important in this sort of a role. So that was one con. And then I would say the other, there were a couple things that, a few comments that he made that made me sort of wonder in the balance between like cooperative leadership and I think he used the word assertive leadership. Obviously, you want cooperative and assertive, but a couple of the examples made me wonder whether he would be as collaborative as maybe the other two that we interviewed. There just seemed to be something about both Sergeant Bradley and Lieutenant Murphy where the seeking the buy-in and bringing people along was sort of came through in their answers more than Sergeant Hoare's, at least to me. So those were a couple of the things that I've been mulling over since we met with him.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, the two echoing Brian, his communication skills were not quite as good as the other two candidates. And the only other thing is once again the discussion on technology, which is important for every department and important to me, was focused on those tactical tools and less so on the operational efficiency of the department.
Okay, thank you. Brian, you hit the nail on the head with one of my, I had written down the assertive leadership as a specific concern because it just didn't, there was something in the answer that just didn't sit right with me as well. I also thought that some of his answers just generally were a little thin. They weren't as robust as I thought the other candidates. And I also did not see a whole lot in his credentials for budgeting. And also just because he would be new to town, I think there would be a slower ramp up and, a steeper learning curve. So those were the cons that I had for Sergeant Hoare. And then moving on to our last candidate, who is Don Murphy, a lieutenant from Westwood. I will put myself in the hot seat and start off. The pros that I saw for him were that he had progressive leadership advancement from patrol to sergeant to lieutenant. He's the only candidate we saw who does have lieutenant experience. He had directly worked on the accreditation process in the very recent past for Westwood. I liked that he had a very long-standing commitment to his current community. And a couple of specific answers that he gave that I thought were very interesting and that we didn't hear from the other candidates. I really liked him offering the idea of career rotation to give different officers within the department the ability to develop professionally in areas that they're interested in, not only to enhance the skills in the department, but also to increase their personal satisfaction. I thought that was a great idea. And I also really liked him highlighting that the SRO position is a philosophy, not a person. That he sees the role of every police officer in Bolton, every officer having a role to play in sort of fulfilling the role of SRO. So those were my pros. Bill?
Yeah, Kate, I think you may have taken a peek at my notes because I specifically wrote down the SRO more of philosophy than a position. I really like that comment, and it kind of stuck with me. He also attended the FBI training course. He's had which probably has something to do with being a part of a larger department. He's done a lot of very different things, and one of the things that he mentioned in the interview process, and also I believe it was in his recommendations, is that he's very strong in traffic enforcement, which obviously, given our geographic location, is probably a big piece of the job. And he was, if I was reading his resume and his letter correctly, he was the accreditation manager for the accreditation process. So he was in charge of that whole process, which is a big deal. And this was a positive influence on me. It probably doesn't mean all that much, but he was the only candidate that sent us a follow-up letter.
Okay. Brian?
Well, I'm not going to repeat some of the things you both already said, so I'll just focus on the additional ones. I liked the couple times where he referenced the 6 pillars of 21st century policing, in particular, the importance of officer safety and wellness. I thought that was a really important element to introduce into this whole discussion. And I also I kind of like the story that he told about the experience of being put into a leadership position pretty early on. I think he was like maybe 18 or 20 or so, but he was working with people that were that had a lot more experience, and he was like, when you're a leader in a group like that, you know that you're not the one that has the answers to everything, and you need to really listen and learn and implement the experience of those around you. And I think just drawing the distinction between being a leader doesn't necessarily mean you're also the person that has all the experience and the answers. I thought that was wise.
Okay, great. And then just to finish off with the cons for Lieutenant Murphy. For me, it was that he is coming from a significantly larger town than Bolton, with fairly different demographics and policing issues than Bolton may have. He's the only candidate who does not have a master's degree. And honestly, this was a theme with all three. I wasn't sure how robust his budgeting experience was. So those were my cons. Bill?
Yeah, the only one that I had really was coming from a larger department and making that transition to a smaller department.
Brian?
Yeah, I remember being a little underwhelmed by his answer around like, well, how would you measure the effectiveness of something? And I think he said something to the effect of, oh, well, if like people are waving and smiling, that just felt um, a little lacking in rigor in terms of how to actually assess the effectiveness of a program. Um, and then, uh, and actually, my notes are a little unclear on this, so I apologize. But I think that it was Lieutenant Murphy where, in response to the question around what would need to be shared immediately with the town administrator or the select board, I think he correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry if I just didn't write this down correctly, but I think he only mentioned things around like HR and employment, but not like a bit like a use of force or something that might get a lot of media attention. So, or like a large potential liability. So I thought that that was a little bit of a weakness in his answer.
Yeah, I think you were right. That was an answer. That was his answer on that. Okay, well, having gone through all of that, does anybody have anything else that they want to add in terms of pros or cons that they've thought of as we were discussing the other candidates or anything like that?
If I can add one more thing with Lieutenant Murphy, he does have private industry experience. He ran a construction company, which forces you to have a little bit more budgetary and HR experience.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So at this point, I think I personally have a view on who I consider to be the top two candidates. And I'm wondering if you guys share that thought in terms of someone that we could eliminate from further consideration at this point. Bill, do you have, you don't have to say who yet, but do you have somebody in mind that you think that we could eliminate at this juncture?
Yes, I believe so. Although I'll add, I think all of these gentlemen will go on to be police chiefs at some point in their career and do a exemplary job.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I think I have um two that rise slightly above for me, but I'm not sure if we're all on the same page about who the two are. So
Okay. Well, so it sounds like we all have two top candidates, and Bill, I do agree with you. I think all three of these gentlemen have future careers as police chiefs, somewhere in Massachusetts. I will say that my personal view is that Lieutenant Murphy and Sergeant Bradley were the top two candidates in my estimation. Um, Bill, your thoughts?
The same.
Brian?
the same.
Okay. At this point, I think it comes down to Lieutenant Murphy and Sergeant Bradley. Um, and I am happy to hear from either of you if you have a favorite, if you have a top selection and what your reasons are. I do have my own thoughts, but I will wait to hear from you guys. Um, Brian, do you have a top candidate?
Um, sure. And actually, let me just say, I have been like angsting about this since well, since before Friday, but especially after Friday, because as you know, I thought we had three really strong candidates. And when it comes to the top two in my mind, my like if I were representing them and advocating on their behalf as a candidate, I feel like my pitches would actually be very different for each one. Um, uh, I think so on Lieutenant Murphy's side, there's tremendous experience. There's, as Bill pointed out, the accreditation stuff. I liked his calm demeanor, and I think that he has progressively shown that law enforcement experience combined with some private sector experience. For Sergeant Bradley, he's obviously earlier on in his career in comparison, hasn't had quite as many years in law enforcement. Um, but I'll be honest with you, like there's just something in my gut around his leadership approach and his like I was imagining, is this somebody that I could envision having to work through a really difficult, tricky problem with? And I kept coming back to, yeah, like I think he could do it. And so, but there's that element of like risk and uncertainty because he hasn't had quite as many years in the job. So they're very close in my mind, but I would say there's something intangible that gives the edge to me to Sergeant Bradley.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that's well thought out, and it is a very tough decision between these two. Bill, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, tough decision to say the least. I wish we needed two police chiefs. My top choice is different. I would go with Lieutenant Murphy over Sergeant Bradley, and what tipped the scales in his favor is, for me, is the private industry experience, um, and his experience doing a lot of different things, and the direct accreditation experience that he has. So I would go Lieutenant Murphy one and Sergeant Bradley two.
Okay. Um, and my thoughts, it is very hard because I agree that neither of these two individuals I think would be a wrong decision. But in my mind, I feel like the best decision is Lieutenant Murphy. I think the broad range of experience, the longevity that he has at senior levels as sergeant and lieutenant. Not to say that Lieutenant Bradley won't be equally skilled at some point, but I just don't know that he has that supervisory experience at this point that and just the level of a higher position to really be able to see how he would respond in to a very serious emergency or a very large problem that could be facing Bolton at some point. My comfort level is Lieutenant Murphy. I just had a little bit more confidence with his level of experience. That being said, my answer might be different if Sergeant Bradley had another 3 or 4 years of experience in Bolton. His exuberance for the position I thought was unparalleled in Sergeant Bradley. But I also feel that he is such an incredible asset to Bolton as sergeant as well. So I don't feel like we would lose anything, although I know he would be disappointed, but I feel like, his skills are still exceptional in Bolton. So, Brian, you have any comments on, it seems like Bill and I are on the same page. Do you have any major concerns?
Um, no, I mean, I I thought that this was a tough decision because they sort of have uh, some opposite and complementary strengths. I guess the only thing that I would just want to say, and I think you guys agree, is that one of the one of the things that a chief does really well is to nurture other leaders within the department to make sure that they can take on progressively more responsibility and find an outlet for their strong skills. And so, if we were to extend an offer to Lieutenant Murphy, um, I would expect that he would see all the potential that we have in Sergeant Bradley as well and want to nurture that because I think Sergeant Bradley has exceptional leadership skills.
I agree completely with that. So it sounds like we probably are ready for a motion unless anyone has anything else that they want to add. But I would take a motion to extend a conditional offer of employment to Lieutenant Murphy, contingent on successfully passing a full background check and authorizing the town administrator to enter into contract negotiations with him, subject to review and approval by the select board.
I second that.
Well, is there a motion?
Oh, sorry. So moved.
Second.
Okay. All right. All in favor, roll call. Bill,
Aye.
Brian,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well. Once again, thank you to all of our candidates. You all were excellent, and we look forward to seeing all of your progressions in your career. We know you will all do a great job. And Lieutenant Murphy, we look forward to working with you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call. Bill,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and I am also a yes. And the time for the record is 11:37.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.